Hello, my name is Samuel Tomatz and I'm the in-house director of photography here at Vault Studios. Today we're going to be breaking down the short film I just DP'd a few weeks ago, Husk.
I am in isolation.
In terms of a more technical side, this film was shot on Cooke Speed Paint Pro 3s with the Sony Venice. In front of the Cookes I used a Hollywood Blackmagic 1/4 filter to add a little bit more of this diffusion. During this opening sequence when we were in the pool, my matte box and entire Sony Venice rig would not fit into the fish tank, so I had to get a little creative and ended up using a Sony FX30 with the Prism Lens FX Lucid Dream filter. The Lucid Dream filter is a lot stronger than the Hollywood Blackmagic filter that we were using for the rest of the film, but this worked in our favor for this part of the film as it needed to feel more like a dream and a disconnected part of reality than the rest of the film needed to be. Husk was directed and produced by fellow Vault Studios employee Cesca-Maria Segarra. Husk is the story of Lily and her struggle with emotional isolation and search for her passion for art. Without further ado, let's break down the cinematography of Husk.
I never got the sense that people enjoyed what I made.
When Cesca first approached me about this film, one of my major questions was how were we going to shoot this opening scene? With so much water work here, I wasn't sure if we were going to be under the pool or above the water. Above the water would be easy and something I've done many a times, but I quickly understood that we needed to be under the water, and with such a tight budget, I wasn't 100% sure how we were going to pull this off. We initially discussed about using fully underwater camera rigs, but with the prices of these reaching hundreds of dollars for just rentals, we knew that that wouldn't be an option. So we opted for a fish tank and some saran wrap. By putting the camera inside this fish tank and saran wrapping the top, we were able to get some of these underwater shots. Now the saran wrap wasn't waterproofing the fish tank at all, but it just made sure that little splashes here and there weren't going to destroy the camera. It was definitely a risky choice, but with risks come great rewards, and we were able to get these shots that define the visual look of the film. Since I was able to figure out how I was going to capture the most difficult shots within the film, I was now able to move forward with more traditional planning around how Husk was going to look. Lighting is one of my favorite things, and Husk was going to be a story told through lighting. We wanted the lighting and the colors to represent the internal emotional struggles the character was having. When our character gets her passion back for painting and art at the very end of the film, we wanted this part to feel brighter and have more saturation within the colors, versus when we start at this dark place inside of the pool, we wanted it to be silhouetted and dingy and dark. It almost needed to be less saturated so we could understand how much the character was struggling. This opening sequence had two specific looks to it: the underwater look and the above ground look. The above ground look needed to still feel desaturated and contrasty, but had to have a little bit more hope and positivity to it. To be able to achieve this look, me and my gaffer decided that it would be best to put up a singular light source, just one 500-watt light. This would allow there to be enough exposure going through the pool to be able to get this underwater look, but also the ability to bring up the exposure on her face when she's floating in the pool. This look of when she's floating makes it so that there is enough brightness and color within the scene to be able to still feel the hope that will come out through the rest of the film. One of my favorite shots has to be when she fully plunges all the way beneath the water. The mix between Jocelyne's movement as she falls and the light getting darker as she plunges into the pool really shows how dark of a place she's in. I believe that this is a great example of how powerful cinematography can be, because it's combining the movement of the actors within the lighting and the camera position to show how she is so isolated within such a large space. This shot then moves us into the second look of the short film, this daytime look. Here we get a straight look into how Lily's life is. Opening up with this large wide kind of really establishes the scene that we're in, before moving into these close-ups showing just how her life is. This shot was set up very simply with just a 200-watt light right off screen. This 200-watt light right off screen allowed there to just lift the ambience of the outdoors just enough to give a little bit more exposure onto the dark side of the car, while also not feeling too out of place. We really wanted this to be a very naturalistic shot here, without really bringing in too much from off screen. The colors within this part also warmed up and brightened up a little bit. As it's not as saturated as we go later in the film, it's still bright enough to show that there is positivity in the world around her, but here her life is still a struggle and she's not able to tap into the art creativity around her. Moving into our third look, we now have the main conversation between Lily and her friend Beau. This conversation needed to be really dark and have a lot of emotional weight to it, It really needed to almost have the characters silhouetted so that their emotional words of the story here really carry what's happening. This look, when we opened, I ended up using just a 200-watt light with a big softbox to illuminate their side of face closest to camera. I wanted there to be some hope within this conversation. Everything around them is so dark and depressing and bleak, and especially with so much contrast and not a ton of saturation in this image, this bleakness world is contrasted by the lighter, opening, and inviting side being faced closer towards camera. In addition to this, our main character, Lily, is a lot more silhouetted and darker, as opposed to Beau. Beau's trying to pull Lily out of this depression and dark, bleak state, while Lily is held back and in this state. This is visually represented by Beau's character being a lot lighter, less contrasted, and not put into so much shadow, while Lily's character is a lot more in shadow and in this darker form of reality. It's my job as a cinematographer to make sure that the characters' emotions are being told visually through the story. And so by working with the director and with the actors to figure out exactly what was going on for these characters in this specific moment, I was able to pull this out visually so that the audience can not only feel the emotional weight of the scene, but they can also have a larger emotional weight with the visuals to go along with it. All of these elements have to be told in tandem together and work properly for the story to be able to be told in full. This conversation is cut up with a few inserts of this dark, depressing alley. These shots were added on as pickups after we had wrapped the film, about a month and a half later. Within these pickups, we wanted her to feel like she was really isolated within this warmth and natural look. But we also wanted the character to be almost completely silhouetted in dark clothing within this dark shadow world. These shots actually start in a warmth look, and this was artificially lit using two nanlite tube lights to light from up top down and using a one that was put on the ground to give it a little bit of an uplight, almost as if it was reflecting off the ground. Behind them you see the natural street lights, which are actually a lot bluer. We were lucky because there was actually a sodium vapor light in this part of the street, so my additional lighting doesn't feel like it's so off-putting. It feels like it's naturally blended within this scene of going from this warmth light into the cool light. Using light in this way allows you to progress the story through the visual tellings of light. Using the color contrast in this film, we wanted to make sure that we could show how the character was feeling within the immediate light that they were being held in, but that far away there was this brighter part of the world that was cooler and more relieving. Well, right now we're stuck kind of in with this more warmth, the dark light. It allows there to be hope within the image, but still that our characters are stuck within this darker light right now. This conversation and sequence of quick inserts ends within this hug, where they both kind of come more into this open light before we end in the resolution of the film. This resolution is, as I talked about at the beginning, this part where it's more saturated, there's a lot less contrast, and the major color of light is this cooler release. Up until now, we've been seeing a lot of shadows and contrasty looks, but now since we kind of pull away from that into a more saturated look, it allows it to be this release as Lily is finally feeling more comfortable with herself and back into her creative inspiration. I did continue to play with some different color contrast within this scene. I put a 500-watt light right outside of this window, and I put a flexible Amaran F21C over top. The F21C was at a 4,000 Kelvin, while the 500-watt was at 6,000 Kelvin outside. The 6,000 Kelvin light gives a cool blue almost light coming through this window, while the 4,000 Kelvin light above is a more orange light. This was done to be able to make sure that this lighting could feel very natural and that the lighting on her skin tones wasn't going to be too blue or too warm. It works to all blend together to create this naturalistic setting of what the light is like and how saturated this world is. This short film ends on a positive note. Not all of Lily's problems are fixed, but I wanted this lighting to be able to tell just how things are looking up. I wanted to tell how she's working through her artist block through the lighting and show that things are starting to look up for our character. I wanted the lighting in this film to be kind of subtle, to almost subtly aid in the story that was being told. I didn't want it to feel overly dramatic and overly lit. I needed it to feel like it was just subtly aiding in the script and the story that was being told. I never wanted the lighting to fully pull the viewer out of the experience of the story, but I wanted it to subconsciously tell them that this is how the characters are feeling and this is the emotional reaction that you should have as a viewer. I wanted it to be in the more shadowy moments for the viewer to feel a little darker, for them to realize that this moment of the film is not as bright and cheery as where it ends. And I wanted the element of saturation to play a large factor here, and for it to not feel like it was overly saturated and trying to pull the viewer out, but I wanted it to feel that as the film got better and as Lily's emotional state progressed, that the film gets more saturated, and that the colors in the world lift and the exposure lift, not keeping Lily in the depression, but allowing her to move forward. When I work as a cinematographer on films, I want there to be a lot more conversation, more about just where I should put the camera and the angle I should pick, and how best to light the scene in terms of exposure. I want my lighting to help tell the story of the film. I don't want there to just be a three-point interview lighting set up to well expose an image, but I want the lighting to tell the story. And I think with a film like this, it subconsciously tells the story. I'm not going over the top, putting hundreds of lights up in a room to tell this story, but I'm working to subtly add lights in these different areas to push the narrative forward of what the story is trying to tell. I look forward to seeing you on the Vault Studios YouTube channel again. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.